Welcome everyone to the 2021 Sunstone Symposium. This is session 233, Premortal Life, Eternal Kingdoms, and Mortal Consequences. At Sunstone, we are making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, there is more than one way to Mormon. We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. After the symposium, Sunstone staff will edit, polish, and re-upload all of this year's session videos to the Hoover app. It'll take about 2 weeks for everything to be available, but once it is, every video will be available to watch and rewatch in the Hoover app to the end of 2021. Please type any questions into the Hoover app to be addressed during the question and answer period at the end of this presentation. As far as this presentation goes, humans create stories to frame our experiences. When those stories provide adaptive knowledge, and especially when they provide purpose and belonging, we pass them along. Thus, there are countless stories of the origin, purpose, and meaning of human life. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this story is called the Plan of Salvation. Drawing on research, experience, and observation, this presentation will demonstrate the positive and negative consequences of the Plan of Salvation story as it pertains to queer church members and their families, including ever more prevalent mixed faith families. In what ways is the Plan of Salvation story adaptive? In what ways does it perpetuate unhelpful and/or damaging narratives? And what are some approaches church members can use to maintain this story while reducing its harm? Now I'd like to introduce to you our presenter. Matt Robertson is a descendant of Mormon pioneers and grew up in East Mill Creek as a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As life has progressed, he has become a secular guy who thinks humans are amazing, families of all kinds are worth supporting. Life is difficult but full of meaning and wonder. History is fascinating. Being an elementary teacher is the best job ever, and it's always worth trying to do good and keep growing. Matt has a Bachelor of Arts in Human Development, a Master's in Child Development, and a second Master's in Music. He teaches at the Waterford School, sings in Utah Chamber Artists, talks trash during family board games, and is funny approximately 28% of the time that he attempts his humor. Although he has stepped away from religion, he often attends church with his wife, Heather, who is LDS, because hanging out with her is cool, and she puts up with his constant banter. Matt and Heather have 3 children, including a remarkable son who is married to an amazing woman, and 2 daughters who are kind, intelligent, talented, and queer. I'll now give the floor to our presenter.
Thanks, Heidi. I appreciate that. And I've been looking forward to this and nervous about it and all kinds of, all of the things. And so I'm really looking forward to spending this time with whoever is there. I don't really have a notion of how many people are currently tuned in, but whoever is there, I welcome you and look forward to spending this time with you. I became aware that my presentation has been nominated by Sunstone for most pretentious title. And there are others who are in the running. There's some pretty strong competitors this year, but sometimes it's an honor just to be nominated. And anyway, I will jump into this by moving on to something slightly less pretentious, and which is, of course, classical music. I want to begin by talking about, I'm going to share my screen here and tell a story about my own history with learning about music, because I believe it's instructive to the topic I want to cover today. So here we go. So I want to introduce you to some people here. On the upper left is a man named Arthur Schnabel. Schnabel was an Austrian pianist who was who spent a good deal of his later life in America. He emigrated from Germany during the 1930s and moved to the United States, where he continued his teaching career. He's a prolific teacher and known as a great interpreter especially of the great German masters such as Beethoven, Schubert, Brahms, Schumann, and Mozart. He studied with the second man here to the right, whose name is Theodore Lestachitsky, which I'm probably mispronouncing. He was another great teacher of many people, of many prominent musicians. He studied with Carl Czerny, who studied with Ludwig van Beethoven. This kind of lineage in music teaching, incidentally, is quite common. This is some of these people taught so many people that if when you study, it's pretty common to bump into somebody that takes you back to Beethoven or Mozart or Brahms or Chopin or somebody like that. So the point of this is really that we start with Schnabel, who is somebody who, again, my teacher studied with, and I grew up hearing stories about and learning about his ways of teaching. And we go back only one person, just to his instructor, before we have someone who was alive at the same time as Joseph Smith. We have then these next three between Lestachitsky, Czerny, and Beethoven, all three alive during the same time as Joseph Smith. All three, Brigham Young, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, Lorenzo Snow. I think it's Joseph F. Smith, I believe, before Beethoven drops off. But then by then we pick up Schnabel and we're moving, we're off to the races again. I share this example because the influences of people who are this far back are very recent. Their teaching is still a huge influence on me and on my approach to music. And so when we talk in the church about things that have, oh, well, that was Joseph Smith. These are older doctrines. These are, things that we are, these are past us. There's very little that is really past us in the church. There's a lot of things that we are, that form foundations of what we believe and what we teach that are still with us in very profound ways, even if they're not things that we talk about every day. So, moving on, here we have a photo, of course, of an upright piano, the way that they are harvested in the wild. Actually, this is the reason I chose an upright for this was because there's a great story about Schnabel playing an upright piano, like this old rickety upright, that he was accompanying a student. The student played first. Schnabel came in, and his playing was so beautiful that the entire room kind of collectively gasped, even though he was playing on this beat up old piano. Truly a great master. Here's some of my favorite quotes from Arthur Schnabel. It says, "I don't think I handle the notes much differently from other pianists, but the pauses between the notes, that is where the artistry lies." And then over on the right here, he talks a lot about he would only play music that is better than it can be played. For him, that meant these composers down in the lower left here: Mozart, Schubert, Beethoven, some Brahms, some Schumann, but these were the great German masters. He focused in on their music and became one of the great interpreters of their music. And of course, my favorite quote of his: "When a piece gets difficult, make faces." And so Schnabel, in his playing, if you listen to, it's hard to find a more sublime experience than listening to him play the slow movement of a Beethoven sonata, or to hear him play a Schubert sonata. If you haven't done this, it's all over Spotify. Take some time, listen to Beethoven or listen to Schnabel play a slow movement of something. It truly is a sublime experience. I grew up feeling like I have had the best of any kind of musical training that I could get about the music that is better than it can be played. This is the music that is a sublime representation of human potential. These masters also were aware of other music from other places in the world. For instance, Mozart, Beethoven, and others did things called Turkish dances or Hungarian dances, where they would take what they considered to be kind of exotic and lesser folk music, and then they would elevate it to a greater standard through their compositions. This was kind of the musical equivalent of bring what you have and see if we can add to it. And so their music was very critical in my musical upbringing. Now, this slide represents something that I became aware of much later. On the left, this line represents, on a timeline, the oldest known musical instruments that have been found. About 50,000 years old in caves in Europe. Over on the right, these two lines represent the last 1,000 years or so in which European style music has been written down. So all of the music that we know, all of the music that we are exposed to is found between these two lines, the line on the right representing today. All of this space in between these lines, all of this space is the music that we don't know about. And we're only talking about the European music we don't know about. If we look here, this is my kind of hackneyed representation of what a timeline of music throughout human history would look like. It would actually go much farther back. There would be a lot more of it. There's never been a recorded instance or any kind of recognition of any culture anywhere in the world that does not include some kind of music. I've become increasingly aware that the amount of music that I know and that I have been exposed to in my years of training can best be represented by the little yellow portion here. And of course, what is that, magenta or maroon or something? I had to try like 5 or 6 different colors to find something where this little yellow line would even show up. But the rest of this represents the rest of the music, whether it's musical traditions from all over the world, musical traditions throughout history, musical traditions that were never written down, that nobody knows anything about. And I've started to learn more and more about music that is, I always thought I was doing the most complicated stuff, the most elevated stuff, the best stuff. And I have found over and over again in the last several years, musical traditions that just beggar belief, leave me feeling staggered and overwhelmed at the beauty and the complexity and all of these things that I just didn't even know were out there in all these different kinds of music. So how this happens, let's go back now to, I fall back a lot on my training as my training in understanding human development and child development and how we learn things. So falling back on that to better understand what's going on in my own process here, it's important to understand that we actively construct our understanding of the world. There is no kind of, there's no knowable objective truth that is something that we understand in completeness. What happens is we are exposed to things in many different ways through our senses, and we construct an understanding of what's going on. We build kind of systems. It's almost like if you think of it as building a dresser and then putting stuff in the drawers. Once you've got a system for understanding things, then assimilation is the process by which you just put stuff in the drawers. I've got a system for understanding this. Now I've got this t-shirt, I fold it up nicely, I can put it in the drawer, it fits great. Accommodation is, these are concepts from Piaget, by the way. The accommodation is when something won't fit in the dresser. I've got a system for understanding this, and now I've got this suit that doesn't fit. If I try to rumple it up and put it in the, it's just not gonna work in the dresser. I need to build a new place to put this. I'm gonna build a closet. I'm gonna hang the suit in the closet. Okay? Accommodation can also look like, I now have a puppy, and this puppy will go neither in the drawer nor in the closet. I don't know, I can't even wear this thing. I need to come up with a completely new system for dealing with this, including possible noisy toys, any of those things. So understanding this, it's like we have to build an understanding. It is a socially guided process. We do this partially by hitting ideas around with each other, learning from each other, learning together about things. And these are things that we can socially construct these things together to understand. And it includes a concept called unknowing disambiguation. This is one of my favorite things that I've learned about recently. I promise we're getting to the plan of salvation, by the way. It'll come eventually. So here we go. You might recognize the dress in the middle, the famous dress from the, that kind of broke the internet several years ago. I listened to a podcast on one called it's called You Are Not So Smart. It's a terrific thing. And there was a psychologist talking about this dress and how it was, they called it a 1 in a billion image, where there is little enough color information. It is not because there's so much information in there, it's because there's so little actual color information in the pixels that your brain defaults to understanding the colors either one way or another, and those are actually quite fixed. So it's the dress that is, for some people, white and gold, and for some it's blue and black. For me, I'm looking at this right now and I'm seeing a white and gold dress. There's no way that I can see this as a blue and black dress. And anyone who tells me that it's blue and black, I'm going to say, you're not just wrong, you're completely wrong. I'm staring at it, it's right here. It's clearly white and gold. This is what's called this unknowing disambiguation. My brain filled in information that is not there in terms of the color in the dress and told me, made a decision and said, these are the colors. I am presenting you with these colors. Here you go. And this is a process that happens without my knowledge. It's a process that is automatic and will come to play in a lot of things because our brain needs shortcuts to deal with all of the information that's happening in the world, or else we'd spend all of our time deciding about things and no time actually doing things and moving forward. Upper left is a great example of this kind of a famous picture. If you look at those and ask yourself the question, it's kind of a weird looking picture, but what color are those strawberries? Almost everyone is going to see them as some form of red. And in fact, if you broke this picture down by pixel, there are no red pixels in this picture. There is no red. But because our brains are exposed to a lesser amount of color information and the way that things are arranged, and we know what strawberries are supposed to look like. We know they're supposed to be red. So there again, our brain fills in the blanks and we look at this, we say, wow, they're red. The Crocs and socks down on the left was something the same scientist who was talking about, I wish I could remember the name, but the same person talking about the dress and the lack of color came up with a different experiment where some people are going to see these Crocs and socks as being, I see the socks as green and the Crocs as kind of gray. I think that there are other people who see them as different colors. It's, but there again, this is the mind constructing things and saying, taking in a limited amount of information and then giving us something that feels like a very certain thing that we're looking at. The picture on the right with the trees, first of all, I just really like it, but it's a photograph, it's not a painting, but I do think it's a nice example of perspective. And when we think about single point perspective and the revolution that brought about in artwork in the Renaissance, and looking at this in the perspective that goes down, it is remarkable to think about how all of these things come about, especially considering this, by the way, is the amount of information we're receiving. 0.0035% is the amount of information, we're back to this graph again, on the electromagnetic spectrum. This is how much we have available to us of what we can see of all of the different wavelengths of different kinds of light that are available. I'm not a scientist. I hope I'm not misspeaking on this. And if there's, if anyone is, but this is what I understand from what I've read, is that we have this very, very, very small percentage. All of the magenta, maroon, whatever color this is this is all stuff that exists, but it's different kinds of light, whether it's, just different things on the electromagnetic spectrum. It's out there, we can't see it, our eyes are not capable of processing that information. So everything that we do is based on this one little sliver of information based on what is out there. And here's how it happens. There's a three-dimensional world, four-dimensional, depending on, I guess, if we think about space-time and all of that stuff, but we'll go with 3 dimensions. It's a three-dimensional world, and light bounces off of stuff. Okay, and then goes into a hole in my face, which of course is the pupil in your eye. That this just sounded cooler. And so goes into there, and reflects on the retina. By the way, it's only a limited amount of light that bounces off of stuff. Some of it is absorbed, but the portion that bounces off goes into the retina or into the pupil, into the retina, where it changes. It is projected as a two-dimensional image and is no longer three-dimensional, and it changes from electromagnetic energy to electrochemical energy. We get a very incomplete thing going on inside of the information that we receive, but then the brain reconstructs this, uses very incomplete information and a lifetime of experience to create a useful 3D representation. It is a representation, it is not a replica. This means that we are operating off of everything that we do from a vision standpoint is virtual reality. It is not reality. We're not seeing, it's just not what happens. Our brains construct a representation of what is happening that we feel very certain about. There's benefits to this. Incomplete information can be dangerous, but uncertainty feels intolerable, or we just sit around just hesitating and thinking about things a lot. Hesitation can be deadly. If you look at the photo that is not the brain down here, these are a whole bunch of crocodiles that kind of blend in very easily. If we sit around thinking about, wait, do I really see that the way that I think I see it? That can be deadly from an evolutionary standpoint. And even more important is our true superpower. That is having some kind of shared reality that we can socially construct together, enables cooperation and helps us to assimilate new information efficiently so that we can do stuff and move forward. That's our true superpower, is cooperation and a shared and socially constructed reality. When we get over to drawbacks of uncertainty, though, it makes accommodation based on new information more difficult or can even feel threatening. When we have to say, no, the way we have been looking at this is no longer, it just doesn't work, that can be very threatening when the world feels very secure in the way that we understand it. It can also create an environment where we are forced to fit in rather than belong, with belonging, of course, being you show up as you are and you belong in the group. Fitting in is more about you have to adapt yourself to make sure that you can assimilate within the group. Okay, so even though we've got this superpower of cooperation and shared and socially constructed reality, when a group reality endangers individuals in the group, it eventually causes harm to the whole group. It causes harm to the individuals immediately. Eventually, it causes harm to the whole group. Okay. Brene Brown has this quote that I really like. It says, "We are a meaning-making species. In the absence of data, we make up stories, because having complete information is a self-protective survival skill." Okay. Now, competing narratives is something that happens all around us. We have stories that conflict and give different information than each other and are sometimes very, very difficult, if not impossible, to reconcile. One of my favorites is in the Old Testament. We have story after story after story where Jehovah makes very clear that he really only cares about one group of people, and it is the people of Israel. And if we're going to go in and slaughter a whole bunch of people and their children and their cattle and all of their sheep, not doing that is a problem if that's what you've been asked to do. And who does God really care about? It's really the people of Israel. Those are the people who are kind of doing things the right way, and they're his people, and everybody else we're not too concerned about. Then we have this book of Jonah in the middle of all this, where suddenly Jonah doesn't want to go and preach to the Babylonians in Nineveh. He doesn't want to do any of that. He doesn't even like those people, and is very nervous about doing it because, of course, everything he understands and believes about them is that they are terrible, they are bloodthirsty, he's just going to go get himself killed. And Jonah finally goes after his adventure with the whale, shows up, and God spares the people of Nineveh. He not only sends a prophet, but then he spares the people. Jonah's very upset about this. And I love the final line of Jonah. As I recall, I think it's the final line is about something about all the people who have been saved. And then it finishes with, and also much cattle, where God is saying, look, would you really want me to destroy everybody? Look how many people were saved here, and their cows. And I'm not sure if at this point the cows are considered more like, and that would have been wasted property, or, and those are also creatures that that I really care about, or both. But either way, these are conflicting narratives. Those things are powerful. They come up over and over and over again in all the stories that we know, and everything becomes a story. Everything is a story. And so those conflicting narratives help to deepen and broaden us as people and help us to navigate the world in a way that is much more nuanced and effective in the way that we, that we move and are able to have an impact. So we become an ongoing construction project. This, of course, is the famous Holy Family Cathedral in Spain, in Barcelona. And this was the cathedral. I can't remember if I read somewhere that it was just recently declared finished or if it's just ongoing, but it's been ongoing construction forever. You can see the cranes up here and everything. So we've got this social context. Everything's happening in a social context. It's all meaning centered. We're trying to understand agents, objects, and actions and consequences. We construct. We do not replicate or even imitate. This gets me to the cherries here in the cafeteria. So there is no such thing in creating a religious understanding or a spiritual understanding. I would go so far as to say, not only do we cherry pick and have a cafeteria plan, but there's not even any such thing as cherry picking in a cafeteria plan. There is only individual and social construction, and every construction is slightly different. There are no two people who believe exactly the same thing. So in the end, there's not even cafeterias and cherries, but it's not because that is, not because I'm saying those things are bad. I'm saying it's even more complicated than that, where we're each constructing something. When we have a culture where a shared understanding results in a balance between beliefs, actions, and values, then that is a stable culture where the story that we're telling within that culture, or the stories, are meeting the needs of the people who tell them and the people who hear them. Our beliefs, our actions, and our values have some kind of balance. Now, when we move into a story that is causing dissonance, then something eventually has to move. Let me give you a couple of quick examples. If our beliefs are that that following the prophet will result in joy and peace, and that the prophet will teach us the best way to love and care for people, and our values are, we want to see ourselves and we want to be seen as people who are loving, caring, kind, and who are making a positive difference in the world. And then we're asked to put up signs and raise money and make phone calls for Prop 8 in California. This is a fairly distant example at this point. But these actions at this point, in terms of the response that is received, gets pulled way over here where everything feels out of balance. It's like individuals, we've all heard stories from individuals who, actually, I don't know if we all have. I've at least heard stories from many individuals who felt a ton of dissonance about, this doesn't feel like what I believe. And then they are seen in a way that doesn't match their values. They even see themselves in a way that doesn't match their values. I don't like hurting people. I don't like doing things that are obviously causing pain to people. And so at some point, this becomes untenable, and people need to find a way to reconcile it. This is where the conflicting narratives go so far as to pull, can pull an entire culture apart, can definitely pull individuals apart. From my own personal experience, having a daughter come out as gay was something where my beliefs, my values, and my actions, I had to really evaluate, and see this happen with a lot of parents of LGBTQ+ kids within the church, where what they start to see in what is happening with their child does not match what they have been taught, what they believe, and ultimately doesn't match the values that they hold for their child, and their actions start to become, within, as they're dictated by the church, start to become quite dissonant and difficult to hang on to. Okay, this is a picture. This is, what's the name? Escher, I think, is the artist. It's a pretty famous picture. This I think it just is just in my mind, how do we resolve these things? One of the things that we can do is say there's no conflict here and find ways to twist ourselves into a pretzel saying that everything is fine, there's no conflict. And this Escher painting, I think, is indicative of kind of what the mental construct that happens. I think from an apologetic standpoint, this picture could be called Occam's razor. This is not the, we end up with these incredibly complex ways of looking at things that don't really resolve the dissonance, but we have to find some way to make it work. I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second here and just show, I recently inherited this book, this book from my dad who was moving. This is not something my dad's been in, I think before the term anti-racist was even a thing, I think was something that, that he would have fit more closely in the category with than most, than most people I know. It's not for me to say who's what, but you understand what I mean. But this book, I want to read the first paragraph here. There is nothing in the doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about which any member need feel any shame, apology, or embarrassment. That's the opening chapter. This, of course, written in 1960. It's not an official church publication, but it's clearly, was written with the sanction and input of the church, and is kind of, famous in apologetics as being something where the entire book, just glancing through it, the purpose of the book appears very strongly to be to help members of the church who are upset about the priesthood and temple ban and who are feeling this kind of dissonance that we were just talking about, who are, let's go to this, let me go back to here, there we go, that are feeling this. It's to help them get their triangle back here as in a way that helps them to see, no, your values are still, you are so loving. And members of the church are so loving. Other people do harm to people of African descent, to Black people in America, to Black people all over the world. Other people do way more harm than we do. We're here, oh no, the gospel is available to everyone. This is, everything here is good. You don't need to worry about it. And it's really to help people get back to this spot without having to move away from the church. Because the problem is, if the triangle can readjust itself in a way, the problem from the church standpoint is the triangle can readjust itself in a way where it's no longer centered in the church. So fairly recently, President Nelson made the statement, truth is truth, and then used some things like gravity as examples of like, this is super clear, truth is truth, there's no way around this. I thought gravity was an excellent example just because it's one of those things where truth has ended up being a lot more complicated. On the left, of course, we have Newton, and Newton's understanding of gravity was different from and supplanted by the gravity as understood by Einstein. I'm going to come back to this love is the answer thing here. I think there's a pretty strong argument to be made for love is not the answer. But and I don't know that Einstein ever held that sign, but picture of Einstein. And then on the right here, this is a little representation of that doesn't really mean anything except for this is my little imaginary quantum mechanics representation. So all of this, which of course is dealing with different aspects of physics, was what Newton said untrue. Once you get to a certain point in physics, my understanding is yes, it was not true. It was at least kind of at best incomplete, but there are still certain spheres in which it operates. Again, not my field. I hope I'm not stepping way off into stuff that I just don't understand, but I think, Newtonian physics might have been able to get us to the moon. It certainly got us a lot of stuff. But there's a lot of other stuff that we were not able to do without this further understanding of relativity. And then once we move into quantum mechanics, which is a different area of looking at things, looking at small things instead of big ones. But without quantum mechanics, there's no such thing as computers. There's no such thing as, as this way of presenting things. All of the, there's so many things that we're using and taking for granted that if we had stuck with with Newtonian physics, we just wouldn't have. And so here's a new quote from not Elder Matthew L. Robertson, who will never be a general authority. And truth is complicated. We construct representations. We find bits and pieces that are useful and then sometimes not useful. Truth is important. I don't believe the truth, by the way, is not real. I think there is truth, absolutely. It's just a question of how much of it do we really understand. It's important, it's beautiful, it's incomplete. Okay, so now we're going to move finally to the plan of salvation. I'm probably about to get a warning that we're out of time, but I don't. Anyway, plan of salvation. For behold, this is my work and glory, to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. This is very, very important. Here's my little representation. I'm super proud of this graphic. So if we could all stare in wonder for just a moment. The premortal existence, then we have birth, we go to the earth, we die, spirit paradise and prison, resurrection and judgment, and then of course, kingdoms of glory and outer darkness. So this is important to understanding how this plan is administered and how God takes care of things within this plan. That which is wrong, this is of course from the Joseph Smith happiness letter, it's known as, to Nancy Rigdon. That which is wrong under one circumstance is maybe and often is right under another. God said, thou shalt not kill. At another time he said, thou shalt utterly destroy. This is the principle on which the government of heaven is conducted, by revelation adapted to the circumstances in which the children of the kingdom are placed. Whatever God requires is right, no matter what it is, although we may not see the reason thereof till long after the events transpire. Oh, and by the way, I'm sorry, when I say the plan of salvation is a story here, that doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean it is true. It's, but this just from the understanding of, everything is kind of, we tell stories about everything. This is a story that we're telling about this. Okay, now in the administration of the work, I'm going to kind of skip over this, but this is about the intelligences before the world was. These I will make my rulers. We have several examples of things done in the premortal world in which people become qualified to become rulers, especially rulers of the church in this world. And we still operate under a philosophy that if it were possible to have just men to be your kings, just meaning, men of justice, establish the laws of God, if we could do all of that, then it would be expedient that we should always have kings to rule over you. So, and then Nephi, of course, in Helaman chapter 10, we have Nephi will not ask anything that's contrary to the will of God. Therefore, everything that Nephi asks is now the will of God. I might be kind of oversimplifying that in a way, but these things are very much understanding. They fit the understanding of how the gospel is administered today. We have two, I'm going to call them get out of jail free cards for the current leaders of the church. Okay? The first one being that recently I heard President Oakes teach that it is impossible for the entire quorum of the 15 acting in unison to be wrong. Part of what this does is it diffuses responsibility among these 15 people, and it also gives us a kind of get out of jail free card for any doctrine in the past that has been disavowed or changed. We can do that without even talking about it, because if we can find one person in the Q15 way back in the day, Adam God is a good example. There were members of the 12 who disagreed with it. We can just not even worry about that because it was not taught in unity by the quorum of the 15. The other one has more to do with the, with the second anointing and calling an election being made sure. If leaders of the church make mistakes, they kind of don't have to worry about that from an eternal judgment standpoint. And coming back to this and Helaman chapter 10, what they say, what they do is the will of God. So in our premortal life, these people were prepared in a way that would help them to lead and guide the people on the earth. Our critical tasks here, we need to obtain a body, learn to walk by faith, being led by those with the authority, and then make covenants through ordinances administered with the proper authority. These are our main jobs here on the earth. The earth here is small for a reason, because it's good to know that this is super short time. Any suffering that happens here on the earth is just for the blink of an eye, really not that big of a deal. It's ultimately for our good. There is still an ideal. There's a ranking. Ranking is real, much as among, if we go back to the premortal life, it's presented as a highly stratified and ranked society where everyone, all of the spirit children of our heavenly parents, everyone knows their place. It's an ideal society. There's no jealousy because anyone who has more or is, is of greater authority or greater rank or position, it's obvious that they're there because they should be. And so we all, we follow them, and that's how we all progress. We're also playing for keeps here. Rough situations happen. They're difficult. If you're born into a tough situation, there's a good chance that it is because of something that happened here, either a lesson that you didn't learn or something that is a trial that you need in order to progress. We have moved away from doctrine that skin color is specifically related to actions in the premortal life. We've never moved away from the doctrine that earthly trials are related to the premortal life, or that being born in East Mill Creek versus being born in Namibia, in a place where there is no clean water, or and there's no food available, which of course I don't have any reason to believe is all of Namibia, but but anyone born into that circumstance is there's a good chance that it's because of something from here, that it might be just not born with as much advantage for a reason. Okay, after this earth, we reach spirit paradise or spirit prison, depending on how well we took care of things here. There is some interplay between these. There's some chances for people to move from prison to paradise, mostly if they did not reject things that were offered in this life. For the resurrection and judgment, it's simultaneous and permanent. There's many teachings about receiving a body assignment, which, depending on where we are in church history, those bodies may either be, what it means to have a celestial body versus a terrestrial or a telestial body are varied according to who is teaching when, but we receive a body that matches us to our kingdom. And we have a family situation that is, if we don't reach the highest level of the celestial kingdom, we are not, or if we're not, at least in the celestial kingdom, there's no certainty or no kind of sense that we're going to be with our family, which I've always been fascinated with that. It's like, there's no such, we don't believe in hell. Everyone, almost everyone gets a kingdom of glory. You'll be separated from your family for eternity, which frankly, I would rather be with my family and, hanging upside down by my feet, being beaten by fluffy pillows or whatever would happen in, the hell version. I would much rather be with my family in that situation than in the greatest heavenly paradise without them. We still have an ideal here, which is to become like God and Jesus, which we understand to be cisgender, heterosexual, in a traditional marriage. There used to be racial things attached to this. I feel like we're moving away from that, which is healthy. But definitely we're still very much attached to the idea cisgender, heterosexual. If you reach the celestial kingdom, or even just in the next life, if you have anything different than that, you will be, quote unquote, fixed into the right way to be. And that's how it operates in the celestial kingdom. There's still, there's a lot we could go into having to do with the celestial kingdom and polygamy, celestial kingdom and patriarchy. But here again, there's a ranking. You move up the ranking according to how your faithfulness and your dedication and your willingness to follow through on that kind of stuff. Terrestrial kingdom is for, folks, as I understand it, and I could be misremembering, but as I understand it, these are people who, lived without God in the world, but were otherwise, really good people, probably shopped at Trader Joe's, had, were socially conscious, whatever, I don't know, but these are, good folks. And Telestial Kingdom is more for people who could have been there, could have been here and aren't. People who did like really horrible things. Which brings us to Outer Darkness. Evidently, very few people will be here reading Joseph Smith's teachings about this. Outer Darkness can be tied to people who apostatized from the church. And it kind of, here again, it kind of depends on where and when you're reading. Okay, now all of this, we're back to drawbacks of unearned certainty. If we're super certain about how all of this works, it's easy to do a lot of harm in the name of this plan. It is a really, really good idea for us to remember that not just in terms of the light that we can see, but the light that we experience, the spiritual light we experience, any of those things, we are living in a world where we have the yellow line. And the rest of it is stuff that we just don't know. Humility is, in the face of all of that, is a really strong attribute to have. We're living in a time where there's so much societal change and so many societies and cultures running into and interacting with each other in ways that are deeper and more profound than have happened, perhaps ever in history, and where there's a lot that we can learn if we are willing to, and if we're willing to assume that we live in the yellow area and not in the purple. Okay? The story is stable when it's meeting the needs of those who tell it. It's unstable when it's causing dissonance. Something eventually has to move. We have a lot of members of the Brighamite branch of the church who are living in this kind of setting right now. And it may or not be actions that are pulled to one direction. It may be values, it may be beliefs, but there are things pulling this triangle in ways that are very uncomfortable and will eventually resolve. And the question is, can they resolve inside the church? So here are my closing thoughts. The first thought is, I think it's important to recognize that the brethren are fine. The leaders of the church are living in this from everything that I can see and everything that I experience. When they're looking specifically at issues having to do with queer issues, queer members of the church, this is something that the members of the church are experiencing. The very top leaders of the church are living here. Their values, their beliefs about all of that, their actions are all well aligned. And this is an experience that members of the church are having. We see that because we have so many parents failing Abrahamic tests. We're asked over and over again as parents of queer kids to put our kids on the altar. Maybe not asked with those exact words, although I have heard that come up. We're asked to put our kids on the altar whenever we are asked to say, encourage them to come to church anyway, even if they say it's harming them. Help them to see the blessings of the gospel and how they need to find a way to either be in a mixed orientation marriage or to just be celibate for their entire life, no matter what kind of harm that causes them. These are Abrahamic tests. And one of the things that I feel most strongly about is to encourage people when there are Abrahamic tests involving their children to fail them with enthusiasm in favor of your children. I feel nothing but peace about that. Leave the altar empty, take your child in your arms, and walk down off the hill. This brings us to number 3, which is taking back the of. We have the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but one of these ofs is not like the other. The Church of Jesus Christ is something that we've talked about a lot, especially in the last few years. That's come up quite a bit. Of Jesus Christ. It is his church. It belongs to him. It is for him and from him. It is the church of Jesus Christ. And then the little tiny writing at the bottom, of Latter-day Saints. Why does of mean something different? There could be two different words there, and there are not. So, of Latter-day Saints. If it is the saints who are experiencing this over and over and over again, it is the mama dragons who are receiving personal revelation that tells them how to get here with their child, and it is very often outside the church. The church does not have space for this to happen for its LGBTQ plus members. This is what happens for, and there are people who find a way to navigate that, and I think that's, and I would never try to prescribe to somebody what their beliefs should be about that, and I would never tell somebody if they say, no, I'm within the church, I'm gay, and I've found this. I think that's wonderful. My experience has been with most of the people I know that there's a lot of this going on. So I guess what I would say is take back the of. This is not the Church of Jesus Christ of the Q15. This is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that's you, and this is your church. And so it's your church and Jesus's church. And I think that that's where I would conclude. I hope my timing is just about right to leave a few minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Matt, for your presentation. And we do, yes, perfect timing as far as questions go. We did receive one comment, and then we have a question. One comment is, I love your example of Newtonian versus realistic gravity being truth. We still teach Newton before relativity, before general relativity, before string theory, Horndeski quantum loop gravity. Perhaps it's useful to think of correlation less than truth as a generally useful model of big T, or capital T truth, for general consumption, but keeping space for nuance as knowledge expands.
Right. No, I think that's lovely. I think it's lovely. It's something that whole area is something that just blows my mind. I know a lot about a few things, and I know enough about that to understand that there's a lot. I'm very much a yellow liner with all of that stuff, but I think you're right. And this goes back to something that is technically not true, like, Newtonian physics gets supplanted, doesn't mean that it's not true within a certain sphere, or that it's not useful, or not, that it's not something that can be, like I said, that can be useful and that is still true in a certain sense.
Thank you, Christian, for that comment. And then we have another question from Janice. Do you generally think that the top leaders feel their values, beliefs, and actions are aligned? Or is it that they feel they're promoting beneficent inaccuracies? Perhaps something like Joseph Smith encouraging the three witnesses to say they saw the golden plates, which leads most people to understand that as literal physical seeing, but that they saw it, quote unquote, spiritually.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic question. And I guess I would just say yes to all of it. I think that I think there are plenty of examples of church leaders doing things that they might say, well, technically, it's like if you kind of stand on one foot and cock your head to the side and squint, you can still find a way to technically make what you're saying true. But it might not be the, kind of the simplest kind of Occam's razor explanation for things. And, but if it's ultimately to the benefit of the members of the church, and if we believe the plan of salvation, and we believe that this is what's going to be of most benefit to people, would I lie to my kids if I thought it would, if I thought it would save their life? Absolutely. I would do it in a heartbeat. And that's not to say that I don't mean to twist your question. I think but yes, I do think that it's possible leaders of the church struggle with this. or struggle with all of these things, and we just don't have a way of knowing. And that they, definitely seem to have the sense that by presenting things the way they're presenting them, they believe that this will be of greatest benefit to the members of the church. And I do give them the benefit of the doubt that that's what they believe.
And then David has a question. If we are in the yellow line, that we just don't have enough information to judge anything or anyone as good or bad, do we? Personal revelation and understanding seem the best we can do in this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of think that, and it's, I guess there are things that I'm willing to judge as bad. I'm willing to, and this goes on, we come up with a very incomplete picture of things, and is still a useful one that helps us to survive. Like, I'm still comfortable even understanding how little information I'm getting out of the electromagnetic spectrum, and how there's a virtual reality reconstructioning happening in my head. I'm still comfortable driving on the freeway. And so far, I've survived that. And so even though we have such a limited understanding, I think that there are still things of which we have a really useful understanding. And just to give an example, and these are extreme, but the, abuse, I think, is wrong. I think that's bad. And I think that we have enough information to be able to classify what that is. When it comes to navigating our own lives within the context of things that are not abuse, then yeah, absolutely. I think personal revelation trumps everything.
Thank you. And then Janice just mentioned in the comments in the chat that she really likes taking back the of. And then going along with that same, Catherine said, would you say the second of is really meant to mean for? How would you define the second of?
I think it's a great question. And and in a way, it's unfair for me to even bring it up because I don't really affiliate with the church at this point, but I still see it as my kind of cultural homeland, and as my, the phrase that I picked up from somewhere is, it's always going to be my home country and my mother tongue. And so in a sense, I'm kind of like, well, I don't even know if I have the right to say any of this. It's certainly interpreted as for, but couldn't we have used that word? That, we could have used a different word. And especially if we approach this as believing that this is something that was directly revealed, this is the revealed name of the church. Can the same word have two different meanings? Absolutely. Could it be seen as more for? Absolutely. And I still think we should take it back. Even the people like me who are a bit, who are more on the outside, I still consider this to be my, this is still my community. This is still my people. I still want this to be a healthy place. And I think, and I do like the idea of take back the of, even if it's for. If this church for me, then it should work for my family. It should work for my family in a way that doesn't leave my kids suicidal.
We have time for one more question. This is coming from Rob. Do you think the Q15 are doing what's best for the institutional? I just lost it. Where did it go? Okay, here it is. Do you think the Q15 are doing what's best for the institutional LDS church or the people in it? It seems they think the institutional church is necessary for anyone's well-being, so they preserve the institution rather than its members.
Yeah, I would just say I agree. That's very much my experience and my observation, which again, I consider anything that I observe to be pretty limited, but yeah, that resonates with me a lot. And I think that they feel like, as you said, that the institution is critical, that without the health of the institution, that's kind of, it's the same argument I've heard for corporations who talk about, if we stop making money, we're going to, then, we have to put that as our first priority, because if we stop existing as an institution, we can't do anything good. And not to draw the, I'm not talking about money with this, but yeah, I would think, it certainly feels and looks and would appear that the institutional health is what comes first.
Thank you. Our time is up. We would like to thank all of you for attending today and for supporting Sunstone. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your sessions today and for the rest of the conference. Thank you so much for joining us.